Hello, viewers, and thank you so much for joining me once again, Costa and Como on the Big Talk with the Citizen Voice Network. And my guest today is very special, Dr. McDonald Lewanika, a guru in the civil society space for many years, a person who understands the rights of the citizens, who understand accountability issues, transparency, and so on. The list is just endless. Mr. Lewanika, would you just meet and introduce yourself to our viewers?
Thanks so much, Costa, and thanks for the glowing introduction. I do consider myself a veteran of civil society, I guess. I'm not sure if I would go to the extent of calling myself a guru, but I certainly have been part of the space with successes and failures, and I'm hoping that we can speak to some of the lessons that I have gained from that exposure over time.
Yeah, very brilliant. I was just trying to be economic with words, but I knew you're a veteran. It's unquestionable. But today's episode really wants to look into what is obtaining in our country politically, the state of the opposition and the state of the ruling party, the ZANU-PF, and where exactly are we heading. So I want to give you an opportunity to just share with our viewers in terms of what are your observations, what your perspectives, what do you see in our country at the moment?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Costa. I think that the question is a very loaded question with many different elements. So let me try to start by the, I guess, broader question of the state of play with regards to our politics. I think that at this particular moment in time in Zimbabwe, we find ourselves in a very sorry place politically. The political space is supposed to be a space where ideas are contested, where checks and balances exist on account of different visions and imaginations of what the country could look like. That's part of the value of having a party that is in power and ruling, and parties that are opposing and proffering alternatives to how things can be done. Without being disrespectful to political actors who are part of the terrain at this particular point in time, I think we are finding ourselves in a situation where ZANU-PF is having what they would call free play. They are basically playing a soccer match with a very weak opposition, if at all it's there. Otherwise, they may be playing by themselves and can score and do whatever they want without anyone marking them, without anyone counter-attacking, without anyone defending. And I think that that's the situation that we find ourselves in. The political parties that are there that contested in the elections in 2023 are either non-existent anymore or weak or complicit in terms of the affairs of the country and how it is being managed or mismanaged by ZANU-PF. As I said, I think that ZANU-PF has got no meaningful and tangible opposition from political parties themselves. But what is even worse is that civil society, which sometimes is counted on to be an arbiter in state affairs, a watchdog in state affairs, also finds itself in a very weak place, either because of inherent weaknesses within the civil society space itself. Some of it is on account of repression, some of it is on account of fear and existential issues around the X that is hanging over civil society's heads at this particular point in time by way of the PVO Act. All civic society organizations, as you may know, are in a situation where at the moment they are they're supposed to be in transition, but in very real and concrete terms, they are hanging in the air. You don't know whether you're a legal entity or you're not. You don't know whether you'll be registered or not. And I think that forces a lot of organizations either to self-censor, limit the extent to which they can play their watchdog role, or be critical of the state for fear of not being registered in this new civil society dispensation. But yeah, overall, I think that we are at a very sorry space as a society and a very sorry state as a country.
I like your observation to the effect that you see ZANU-PF as the only player in as far as the politics developments are taking place in the country, because we have the opposition that is very weak. But how would you respond to someone who says the opposition dominates the urban councils, and we actually have the opposition right now, members of parliament, who are going there daily to argue, to do what is meant within parliament business. So what would be your response? And in that response, what is it that should have been expected from the opposition? What would you like to see them doing?
Yeah, again, another very tough question, Costa. I don't know where you're doing it. But let me start with the issue of the question of who presides over the state and at what level in this country, which you raised. You rightfully pointed out that in urban councils, for instance, the opposition primarily is in charge of these urban councils, and then in terms of the central state, ZANU-PF is in charge. I'm a political scientist by training, and in political science, we call this kind of a situation vertically divided authority. So when you've got a situation where you've got vertically divided authority, often what happens is that you then run into a situation where, at least at the local level, at the levels of the cities themselves, the local authorities, there's a lot of gridlock that then takes place. Nothing is able to move because of the contesting forces. The central state trying to have its way at a local level, and the local level trying to assert its independence. And as a result, nothing really moves. and traditionally, that has been the case where Zimbabwe is concerned. I think you'd recall that where the city of Harare is concerned, many mayors have been dismissed, arrested, town clerks have been arrested. Some of them were guilty of corrupt activities. Some of them, it was a matter of political discipline, because you are refusing to do what the central state wants you to do. You are then punished as a result. But what then occurred was that we had a constant system of checks and balances. The central state could not do what it wanted without the acquiescence of people who were presiding over local authorities. So some kind of a negotiation would then have to take place, and sometimes it would yield dividends, but sometimes it would yield gridlock on account of these differences politically. You remember the point that I made earlier, that the political space is a space for contesting imaginations around what the state needs to look like. So that was the situation. But I think when you look at the local government space at this particular point in time, that dynamic is no longer in place. We see a lot of cooperation between local authorities and the Ministry of Local Government and urban housing, for instance. We see the mayor of Harare, His Worship, Jacob Mafume, is being accommodated by ZANU-PF, is being saluted, and he is cooperating basically with the central state. There is no conflict at this particular point in time, and that raises a number of issues and contributes to this situation that we are in. When you've got these different arms of the state or different levels of the state engaged in cooperative governance the way that it is right now, then the first thing that suffers is accountability, the removal of checks and balances. So that dynamic that used to play out even prior to 2023, when Jacob himself was the mayor of Harare, is no longer there at this particular point in time. I think you'd recall the big fight that was there around I think Sakunda, and what Jacob qualified as wanting to buy Rufaro Stadium through the donation of a couple of bucket seats, which he resisted. You would recall the Pomona issues and how valiantly local authorities, the local authority in Harare, fought against that. That is no longer the situation at this particular point in time. And part of the explanation for that particular set of affairs takes us back to the mainstream political arrangements. Now, I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks that, compliance, the kind of compliance that we're seeing happens as a result of a wide variety of factors, sometimes in combination, sometimes it can be one. So sorry to cut you. I just want us to have a conversation where you also respond and I happen to make some follow-ups. Maybe let's assume that you get to have that opportunity to give an advice to the mayor of Harare. You've raised a very fundamental points to the effect that he seemed to have been assimilated himself into ZANU-PF in the government program
people can't draw the distinction whether he does represent the opposition or not. What would you advise him? What would you tell him if you're going to get an opportunity to meet you?
I'm not sure I would be able to give him any meaningful advice, but I will answer your question by saying that, I mean, part of what we need to okay, without shifting blame or allocating blame, Jacob Mafume and the councillors in the city of Harare, just like many other urban authorities that the opposition is in charge of, is a political deployee without a home. He has got no political party, in essence, to be accountable to. You know, so if I was in his shoes, maybe I would have done the same thing. I've got no political principle. My political principle was Chamisa, and I think he got expelled, and then Chamisa left the party, and then the party is no longer there. So these are political operatives without a political home. They've got nowhere that they're getting their direction from, and it's very difficult for them to fight in this situation because there is no cover from a political party. So when we look at what is happening and try to address it, I think that it leads us back to the question, which is where I was heading with my answer, that the problem may not necessarily be with quote-unquote opposition people who are in parliament or in local authorities, but we need to revisit the vehicle. The vehicle is not there. And some of them are independent. What does it mean to be an independent councillor in Harare? Who are you accountable to? To what extent can we hold you accountable to the residents who elected you? And where are you getting your sense of political direction from? When you've got no political cover and no political home to go to, sometimes for purposes of survival, political survival, then you find yourself having to cooperate with those that are presiding over the central state because you know that you've got no cover.
And what would you say to those who are in parliament? Because there have been arguments even before to say they should pull themselves out because they are not serving anyone's interest. They, at least their constituencies, right away when the president, their party president, Advocate Nelson Chamisa resigned from the party and so forth, there have been so much call for these people to leave parliament. How would you advise them at the moment?
Well, I think that you know, part of the question that what you are saying begs is one around. Okay, so we call it counterfactuals, the what if situation. So what if these guys had pulled out of parliament when Chamisa disputed the elections, not when he resigned from the CCC and stuff. When he disputed the elections, what would have happened? And I think that the results would have been the same. So
at any stage,
they would have been the same. If you are not there, ZANU-PF is going to have its way. You are there now, ZANU-PF is going to have its way. But part of the value of staying in parliament and even in urban authorities is to try to ensure that at least when history judges, it doesn't judge you too harshly, because you may be in place in proffering alternatives, even though you know it's not going to go anywhere. You know, our parliamentary system is a whipping system. Otherwise, we would be having, even opposition voices, not just from opposition political parties, but from ZANU-PF itself. But we know that when ZANU-PF takes a position, what it wants will sail through, and we know that they have the majority. So their presence is very symbolic. And serves to at least table some alternatives. But again, these are alternatives that are not coming from a political movement. These are alternatives and ideas that will be coming from the parliamentarians themselves. And some of them know that on account of staying in parliament, the public is going to punish them for not being in solidarity with Chamisa come 2028 or whenever the election happens. So for some of them, they are there either to recover. Of course, we know that in this country, campaigning, just like anywhere else, there's a lot of money involved in politics, and some of them are there to get what they can by way of recovery, knowing that they have a limited to no political future post-2028, because people are fairly unforgiving, regardless of whether what you have done is strategic or not.
And let's look at maybe your perspective in terms of the recalls that we saw soon after the elections. I just want you to share your thoughts. Was it something that could have been avoidable? What were the implications and so forth? Is it then something that then led to see a very docile kind of an institution that we're seeing right now that is not very responsive to what ZANU-PF is doing, having its own way in every circle?
Yeah. So first, let me start by saying that there's been a lot of abuse of the recall provisions in our jurisprudence, and this did not start with the 2023 elections. We know that in previous iterations of the elections, this recall provision has been used by the opposition. So ZANU-PF is actually, to my memory, I don't recall ZANU-PF actually ever using the recall provisions to recall members of parliament. But it has abused that facility and instrumentalized it in ways that ensure that the opposition remains fractured. So it's not a good thing that has been happening. It flies in the face of issues around electoral accountability. People elected who they thought was good for them in terms of representation, and then someone else on a whim for all sorts of political reasons, comes and recalls them and replaces them with people that are evidently or arguably not accountable to the electorate. So it's a very bad thing that has been happening. But it is a bad thing that has been happening to the opposition at this point in time. In Shona they say kuzvikokera moto mziso. Yeah. So it's something bad that is happening to them, but something that they
invited.
They invited unto themselves.
For themselves.
And they did so through a variety of ways. One was the political experiment that Nelson Chamisa and the CCC ran ahead of the elections. I mean, you are in I used the allusion of a soccer match earlier. You cannot want to play soccer using rugby rules. If you're playing soccer, you use soccer rules. If you bring basketball rules or rugby rules, it's not going to work well for you. So I respect the initiative, innovation, and imagination of the movement to say, no, we are going to be structureless, we are leaderless, or we only have one leader and stuff like that. And we have no constitution, we have got no structures, and so on. It's interesting and exciting to look at from a political movement building perspective. But you are in politics, and you are in politics within a particular framework where political parties run against each other, and the structures are known and well established and stuff like that. So the absence of these things opened them up to a person like Chabangu then stepping up and saying, I am the Secretary General when he is not. But what are the alternatives? Where are the statutes that show us that he is not? When did the election for this position take place and stuff like that? So it's something that they invited upon themselves on account of this I think you called it strategic ambiguity and structureless movement and stuff. But when you are that innovative and imaginative in a formal space, you then invite the kind of things that have visited them as point number one. Point number two is that these kinds of situations then create opportunities for a clever party like ZANU-PF to take full advantage of the situation. And I think they did that. I think that to all intents and purposes, a lot of these recalls were not inspired by political differences within the opposition itself, but were inspired by perceptions of who can be difficult for ZANU-PF to deal with in parliament or local government, and then using this self-appointed Secretary General to then do their dirty work. Ultimately, what ZANU-PF failed to win at the ballot box, they were able to get through political machination and capturing elements of the opposition that were prone and open to capture.
So, in brief, what should have been done better?
Well, there are many things that could have been done better, and I guess this is a challenge for Nelson Chamisa and anyone else who might be thinking of organizing politically in this country. I think that there is a place for imagination, creativity in terms of how you mobilize, but I think that institutions serve purposes, structures serve purposes, constitutions serve purposes. And having learned what we learned from the 2023 election, I think it's a position that we need to reconsider. And if he's thinking of coming back or building an alternative movement, then he also needs to do so in ways that put in place the infrastructure and institutions in place that safeguard against this thing. The second thing that could be done is actually to get rid or review that RICO element in terms of our statutes. We understand how it has been abused. People have complained that people are being recalled by people that they either do not they do not identify with as political parties and even as ordinary people. And I think that that's a problem that needs to be looked into so that Costa does not come and say, I am the first secretary of ZANU-PF and do the same thing. Yeah.
And then how should the opposition now move from now? I know we at some stage we're going to discuss fully in terms of the 2028 elections prospects and so forth. But how should they carry themselves from now going forward?
It really depends on who you are calling the opposition. I mean, my contention from the beginning was that, in terms of the mainstream formation of the opposition that we have known historically, the MDC, MDCT, MDC Alliance, CCC, that is basically non-existent at this particular point in time. And I'm not sure whether that is what you are referring to as the opposition. But we can address it in both respects. So if we look at that, I think that there's a lot of investment that has been done in terms of building that movement. Of course, with positives and negatives in terms of the political culture where that movement is concerned. But I think that there's a lot that we can be able to recover from that process and build up from there. That's one thing that they can possibly do, reconstituting themselves into the multi-stakeholder movement that they were. And see whether they can challenge ZANU-PF aggressively. That's one way of looking at it. But the other way of looking at it is that 26 years after the formation of the MDC, as we know it, having been born out of the labor, constitutional and students movement and other movements in 1999, 26 years later, perhaps it is time for a new way of thinking, a new way of framing issues, perhaps even a new way of organizing, as long as it is compliant with the legal requirements of the country and is able to navigate the political terrain, the political rules of the game as they are currently constituted. So there is a vacuum that has been created by the absence of both Nelson and the Triple C from the space, and I think that other people need to be brave enough to occupy that space and organize the people, because they are not being organized or led in any meaningful way by any of the political parties that are there on the terrain at the moment. I was looking at ZAPU in the way that it has tried to reinvent itself, focusing on young people. I saw I think it's the Zimbabwe Communist Party, which seemed to be very niche in its approach. I know of Professor Maduku and the NCA, but the reality is that none of these political parties is doing any meaningful political work that people can identify with and make them feel they're being represented in terms of that particular voice. So there is an opportunity that is there for Job and others to occupy the space if they are brave enough to do so. Would I be right to say you expect to see an opposition that is united, where you have former colleagues who had disintegrated, forming, may belong to the MDC, MDCT, CCC, and even other fragmentations to come together? Not necessarily. not necessarily. I think that if we are to talk about a path to power for the opposition in this country, it has to follow what you are talking about. A united opposition with disparate parties coming together to contest ZANU-PF. And I think that that's what they tried to do in 2018 through the MDC Alliance. And that particular election was contested. Some people actually believe that Nelson Chamisa won that particular election. So if you want to win the vote, you need to have an aggregated opposition, everyone coming together, contributing what they can contribute in order to face this very big beast that is called ZANU-PF. It is entrenched, it has been organizing, and it has got state power. So in order for you to fight that, you need this coming together of different forces, not just from the opposition or from the opposition beyond people who have traditionally been opposition, but even disaffected people from ZANU-PF need to join that bandwagon. That is, I think, the only way that the opposition in general can stand a decent chance of defeating ZANU-PF. But I am not a politician. I'm not in the business of looking for power. I am in civil society, and what I care about is things getting better for our society, in our diversity. And coming from that particular position, I think I've got respect for anyone who wants to form a vehicle that can be able to aggregate our interests. Even if there are 15 different vehicles, it's okay, because that is how diverse we are. You cannot force us to be united if we are not. And we need to be represented using different vehicles and different formations. If it is possible, let's have Christian parties so that us as Christians can join those parties. Let us have Muslim parties so that the Muslims can join those particular parties. Let us have socialist parties. Let us have nationalist parties. Let us have social democratic parties. That is what a diverse society looks like. But that kind of setup cannot win power in this country. If people do want power, then the suggestion that you made from the onset, I think, is the way to go. Put together a winning coalition that brings together different political interests from across the political divide. There are people who are disaffected in ZANU-PF right now. There are people who have been expelled and suspended from ZANU-PF over the course of the last 5 years. There are people who were expelled from ZANU-PF in 2017. Gather these people together and put up a stern challenge. That would be a viable path to power.
I wanted to ask something. We recently, I think the political parties' finances were gazetted. And I'm sure ZANU-PF should have received its share, and so is also the opposition. But in its fragmentation, who do you think does have the right to be given that money, to receive that money?
Yeah, I think that there are different claims to legitimacy where that money is concerned, right? I think it's obvious. Chabangu believes it deserves it. Walshman would be thinking the same. Jameson Timber, representing the CCC faction loyal to Chamisa, would be thinking the same thing. I don't think that it is my place to be able to say, no, the money belongs to this one, should not be given.
I just wanted to share your perspective
to this one. Yeah, but in my cursory assessment of the situation, I mean, regardless of what people may say or may not say, it's clear that the legitimate formation of the formation of the Triple C that was led by Nelson Chamisa, its remnants still remain under the leadership of people like Jameson Timber, like Promise Mkwananzi, and others. If this was a fair world, these are the people that would get access to these resources as the CCC. But we know that we are not living in a fair world. We know that ZANU-PF's interests would not be to support their formidable opponents, so they will obviously take the resources elsewhere to a weaker formation, and where they possibly can be chowed or used for personal aggrandizement rather than building a movement.